Hi, I'm Mark, and this is the Fast Track Impact podcast, where we look at how researchers can become more productive and use their work to achieve real-world impact. In today's podcast, we'll be looking at the benefits of working with knowledge brokers. And I'll be doing that in conversation with Rosemarie Neumann, who is, in fact, herself a knowledge broker. But before we get into that, I'd like to give you my research impact tip of the week. So this week's research tip is to make your research massively more accessible to the people who are making decisions in this world and who might be interested in your research by listing your papers and setting up a profile on ResearchGate or Google Scholar. These are two of a number of different services out there that do this kind of thing for you. I like these two in particular because they are dead easy to use. So these services typically find your papers for you in various ways. We'll send you an email to ask if this is something that you did indeed co-author. And yes, sometimes it gets it wrong and you can read them out. That's fine. But without a lot of hassle, without having to type stuff in, you can very quickly populate a profile and curate this so that you can, certainly in the case of ResearchGate, put on your top papers that you really want to make visible and you want to be widely read, and just fill in other details about your research, link to your personal website, all these kinds of things. And instantly now, your research is significantly easier to find in any Google search or whatever other search engine people might be using to research any particular topic. If you can find a copyright-free version of your article, perhaps a pre-publication proof, or if you can contact the publisher and ask permission, I've done this for most of my articles, and in most cases I've managed to get them online in their full text, then all the better. You're doing a favour to all the researchers around the world now who can't get access to research because they're behind paywalls. As well as the government analysts and the consultancy firms who are doing analysis for governments around the world, so that they have the latest evidence and ideally your evidence at their fingertips. And of course, if they want to contact you on your profile, your contact details, and they can follow up for more work. So the tip is make your research massively accessible by setting up a profile on ResearchGate or Google Scholar. So I am here in a hotel lobby, hence the random background noises, with Rosemarie Neumann, who is a knowledge broker. Rosie, tell us a little bit about yourself to start with. How did you end up becoming a knowledge broker?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I suppose I was interested in nature all my life. I've been hiking since I was very, very little. And hence I decided to study landscape ecology. So being interdisciplinary trained for quite some time for all my masters. And I decided to do my final thesis in New Zealand. I worked with geckos. And besides that, I worked in local conservation, which was great. In some ways, but it was great, not great in other ways, and that was the aspect that there were so many actors who were meant to work together quite well, but they didn't end up working quite well. And the trouble I found out was that they didn't communicate that well, or at least not as good as they should. So yeah, that was I think the first time I was really getting interested in finding out why, why is it that they don't communicate and what can I do to change it? And so I think that is the basis for me becoming a knowledge broker.
So did it work? Did you manage to achieve the kind of changes that you hoped to achieve?
Well, in some ways I was quite happy at the time because I did it the way I was, happy with that time, which was a more rebel way. I put my fist on the table and said, you guys, you have to do that. It's your obligation to save the geckos. And in that way, they kind of got going, and there was this more and more community support from that. There was support from the local NGOs and other local researchers and so on. And so there was quite a backing. And this actually led to the first community-based dual gecko recovery program. And I was happy to play a role in that. And after I left New Zealand, I actually found out that during some of the stuff that I, started with during that time, it ended up that jeweled geckos, amongst other green geckos in New Zealand, were listed higher in the CITES appendix, which makes them even more protected on the international level, given that they are smuggled and poached. If that's a good outcome on the international basis, I wasn't expecting it, but it's the best thing I can think of, yeah.
Fantastic. So effectively that passion that you had to try and achieve a change was something that you really cared about, was what actually forced you into the role of knowledge broker, which you then ended up really succeeding in. And now you are very much a knowledge broker. And so I wonder if you can describe for me what for you is a knowledge broker. What does that mean?
Yeah, for me, a knowledge broker's role starts to connect the people necessary to have the impact that is wanted. So identifying that, identifying the networks that they work in. And the second part is communicate. So get them on the same table, in the same room to communicate to each other. This can be done through workshops, through just meetings, a small meeting, big meetings. And knowledge broker can facilitate that. They can moderate. They can even be do the conflict resolution if that's in a room, which sometimes is the case with different ideological ideas. And the last bit is to sustain those relationships. So what is necessary to build the trust that those relationships are built on? I think that's wrapping up the 3 ideas about a knowledge broker for me.
Okay. So if you are working with a researcher and you're trying to help them to build these networks, communicate more effectively and achieve change, can you give us a feel for the kind of things that you would do and the kind of reasons why a researcher might choose to work with a knowledge broker?
Maybe I use an example for that. Imagine you're like an ecologist. Imagine you're like a below ground biodiversity researcher and you have no idea what an impact is that you can make with the work you're doing as a researcher. So you would come to me and ask and identify the target group as a first instance. Who are the people that I want to target? Is it actually kids that you want to educate and say earthworms are the most amazing creatures on Earth and that's why? I mean, that would just generate the next generation of conservationists. You never know. But you might as well want to kind of target policymakers and want to have an impact on, let's say, even the European agriculture policy. So in order to do that, you would have to identify, who are the exact people, what you want to, what school age the kids have to be, but exactly at the same time, sorry, if you choose to have the policymakers as a target group, who are exactly the ones that you want to do? What is the legislation you want to have an impact on? And this is when, this is the first step to identify those people.
Okay, so you've helped the researcher now to work out who it is that they're trying to communicate with. So they're connected to school kids, they're infusing all these conservationists of tomorrow. They've identified particular groups of policymakers with specific types of legislation now that they're trying to perhaps influence or change or improve in some kind of way. What's the next step? How can you then actually work with those researchers to achieve change?
As I said, the connection was the first step. Now we are leading to the second step, which is communicate. it's quite a difficult thing. You know, you're a researcher and you're talking with your language, but your target group might not. So you're talking totally different way with a kid, explaining why the Earth Run is so amazing, but you're also communicating in a totally different way if you talk to a policymaker. So I will try to help you to address that, and maybe I'm also like acting like a translator and help you to do that, especially if you have like policymakers have a totally other expertise. So what is it that helps them to understand what you're doing, and what are their questions? You know, it's not just a one-way communication that I would help you to fulfill, but I would really rather to have you having a sustainable dialogue with the target group you're aiming at. So the policymakers have their expectations, and they have their question of why and what your impact can be, and they might come up with other questions that helps to find a common idea to pursue with the impact.
So to what extent is this you kind of mentoring, coaching, guiding, training the researcher so that they themselves can achieve these kinds of changes, or to what extent is this you actually going out and doing this for the researcher and actually doing that communication for them, or is it a bit of both?
I think I wouldn't consider myself as the one who, like, let's say, sets up your Twitter account or something, if that's a choice of communication tool. But I can help you and support you with setting up a communication strategy in the first place, targeted directly at the target audience. And I can help you to see, like, what are your strengths, what is the communication strategy that works best for your personality if you're like coming as a single person, but the same as if you are like a big research project. It's like, what is the strength in your team, and what really helps to get the aim achieved that you set for yourself, and what are kind of the impacts that maybe are even required from the research grant or the research funders. Research funders. So if there's any specifics there, I can help you with that for sure.
Okay, so to what extent is this something that the researchers can or perhaps should be doing? Should we all actually now be knowledge brokers? Or to what extent is this something that we should be relying on people like you to do with us and for us? At what point do you decide as a researcher, right, this is the point at which I need help now, I need professional help now?
I think the first answer I would give there, it's totally up to you when to decide if you want to help, external help, or you don't. I'm not one of those supporters who says, like, every researcher has to become the most amazing knowledge broker. But having said that, if you are one of those natural people, then awesome. But if not, then, you've got your expertise, and that's brilliant. And, if a knowledge broker, all the knowledge brokers have their own expertise, and you have to find the ones who complements your skills, basically. And maybe just to give you a really blank example, like if you need help from a plumber, you wouldn't necessarily need to do it yourself, but you would get a professional plumber. So that's, in a way, it's the same with knowledge brokers.
And some people, unfortunately not me, can actually do plumbing themselves. Yeah, if only. So what are the benefits then that most of the researchers that you work with say that they get out of working with a knowledge broker? And maybe from the other side, policymakers or other people that you're helping to access knowledge from researchers, what do they say are the benefits of working with a knowledge broker?
And a knowledge broker can really also help to connect the people, not just choosing who they are, but also once they're identified, help you to kind of sit together. I can help to facilitate any meeting that you may have, any workshop, moderate the workshop. And given that I have a training in mediation, I can really help if surely there are conflicts in terms of, different ideas. And if that's clashing, against each other, I can help to solve that, to come up with a good communication on a long-term basis.
Cool. So if people want to find out more about what you're doing, how should they do that?
Well, I'm just setting up my own company called Impact Dialogue. The sub-headline is actually going to be, as I said, the fifth step. It's going to be connect, communicate and sustain. And I've chosen Impact Dialogue because I think the smallest entity to communicate is a dialogue. And not just only between two people, but it's starting with oneself, like a dialogue with oneself to reflect, then to have a dialogue with other people, and then going from there as the smallest entity of trusting relationships and, really sustainable knowledge transfer or whatever you want to achieve.
Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to help us understand what being a knowledge broker is all about and how we as researchers can benefit from it. So each week I like to try and give you an action that you can do based on what you've learned in the podcast today. So Rosie described a knowledge broker as someone who helps connect people, who then helps those people to communicate more effectively with one another, and who then helps those people to sustain those trusting relationships for the long term. Now, very often a knowledge broker is someone who connects people who would otherwise be disconnected from each other. Now, people may be disconnected for many reasons. They may be disconnected in space. They just simply are too far apart physically from one another. But very often this is actually more of a relational disconnection. These are people who just live in different worlds, who see the world in a completely different way, which is perhaps in some way incompatible or just doesn't make sense. They may be disconnected through language. They simply can't understand one another, whether that is an actual language barrier or whether it's just the jargon that those people use. And very often this is a relational disconnect based on conflict. Whatever that reason is, an effective knowledge broker can help us to bridge those divides and create connections with people that we need to be able to communicate with and be in relationship with if we want to achieve impact. And so what I want you to think about this week is who you might need to connect with that you are not currently in relationship with. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the different publics that you ideally would love to connect with, who you really feel like you ought to be in relationship, that you feel that you will have to know if you want to have the impacts that you want, but that you are not currently in relationship with. And now I want you to think if there might actually be someone in your network at the moment, perhaps someone in your department, who could actually facilitate that relationship, who could introduce you. They might have them in their address book. They might be connected to them on social media, from a former role, perhaps they came out of industry. Whatever the reason is, have a think about whether there might be someone who can help you to make that connection. And if not, think about whether you might want to engage a professional knowledge broker, like Rosie, for example. And the second task that I would like you to think about is whether, in fact, you might be that person. So have a think about whether there might be someone in your research group, in your department, who needs, ideally, to connect with people that you know who are in your network, who you might be able to introduce them to. So I've got connections with policy people in environment-type departments in the UK and in other countries. And, I'm in a fairly new department here in Newcastle. And maybe there are people who I could reach out to say, well, you know, that stuff that you're doing on X or Y, have you ever thought about talking to this group within this particular government department? Do you know these guys? If not, then maybe I could connect you to them. I'll send you an email and introduce you to each other. I think these guys would be interested in this particular part of your research. What do you think? I'm going to try and act on that in this week. Hopefully you can act on that this week and see who you can connect through your networks and whether you might be able to take a step yourself towards being a bit more of a knowledge broker. Give it a try and I'll see you here next week.